You're trying to be an independent business and support your family and live your dream and do all the things you want to do. But you still have to build that audience and monetize that audience. And the problem that I kept seeing over and over again were content creators were just thinking about the content portion of the business, but not the business side. Is this an audience that I can even make money from, Lee?
Hi, and welcome to Road to Revenue. I'm your host, Lee, and joining me today, well, normally we talk about creators and their bumps in the road, the twists, the turns on their road to revenue, but joining me today is, well, it's Mr. Content Entrepreneur himself, Joe Pulizzi. Welcome.
Lee, thanks for having me. And you said my last name correctly, which you already get some street cred for that.
I do try, and I'm gonna take credit for maybe being so close to Italy. I don't know. Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah.
Well, the question is, how do you say bruschetta, right?
Yeah, that's, oh man, see, yeah, I'm American Italian or Italian American, if you will, which means we don't know anything. Actually, if we were in Italy, we'd say Pulizzi.
Pulizzi. Well, there you go.
And if we do, we've got to, and people can't see, if they're not watching this, you have to put your hand out. You have to use two hands if you can to say Pulizzi. So,
well, do you know what? I'm glad I've got that started. And before we hit record, one of the things I did say, and I will try and keep to it, is I'm hopefully going to ask you some questions that you haven't heard, because by virtue of your philosophy, you've put a lot of your own content out there, and it hopefully will be enlightening. But I'm not going to lie, it's been a little bit of a challenge. So let's see how I get on.
All right, I'm excited. I'm excited.
So for those of, I'm talking like I know a lot about where you've come from, your history, and some of the successes, but some of the people joining us today may not be as familiar. So give us let's say your cocktail party intro. What's your origin story been to this point?
I spent the last 25 years in an industry called content marketing, which wasn't called content marketing until about 2007. I grew up in business-to-business publishing, saw all these media companies able to build audiences different ways, make money from those audiences in different ways. And as I was working with more marketers, I had realized, could plainly see what most people couldn't see. And it was the fact that we had been over investing in advertising for so long and under investing in storytelling in these enterprises. And I said, wow, there should be, I could do this for a living. And started a business in 2007, lots of ups and downs. I'll save you some of that story. But in 2010, created something called Content Marketing Institute, education and training organization for content marketing. Content Marketing World, the event, was created. A few years later, it was about 4,000 people coming to Cleveland, Ohio for our annual event of content marketers, and written lots of books, probably best known for Epic Content Marketing and Content Inc. Sold that business. My wife and I own that business. Sold it in 2016, stayed until 18, and then started doing lots of different things and got involved in the content creator side, which I call, as you already mentioned, content entrepreneurs, because if you're a content creator trying to do this and create this as a business, you are an entrepreneur first. You just happen to use a content business model as part of your business, which we can talk about a little bit. And I keep busy by writing, and I got 2 podcasts, This Old Marketing and Content Inc., and just wrote the Content Entrepreneur book with a bunch of friends of mine, and just trying to be helpful as much as I can, Lee.
And it's all centered around content, but it's really interesting the way you've pivoted and the way you're delivering it out and, well, harvesting it as well. Like the content entrepreneur, and having read your books, it very much was a departure. Like, what was that like, working with so many different voices, so many different people?
Honestly, I was done. And we sold the business. I was sunsetting my content marketing career. I felt like I did all the things, Lee. And then COVID came around. I wrote a novel called The Will to Die, fiction novel, did pretty well. And I was like, I'm going to write thrillers. That's going to be my new thing. And then COVID came around and changed a little bit in the fact that I started to get a lot of emails and a lot of texts from friends who were content creators or marketers that were leaving to to try to build a business online and build an audience and monetize that audience. And then I realized that, well, maybe my job isn't done. Maybe I can be a little bit more helpful. Republished Content Inc., which was my book from 2015, which talked about the process of building an audience and monetizing it. And then created an organization called The Tilt, which started as a newsletter for content creators. I think we have about 35,000 content creators, content entrepreneurs signed up for that. Launched an event called CEX, Content Entrepreneur Expo, which will be August of 2025. I think is the next one. And then ended up, selling that as well. And I stay involved and do all the things. And now I'm into publishing through Tilt Publishing. We help, content creators publish their books and sell directly. It's just about where's the problem? And the problem that I kept seeing over and over again were content creators were just thinking about the content portion of the business, but not the business side, not the how, is this an audience that I can even make money from, Lee? Why am I, can I financially afford to do what I'm doing right now? Do I have the timeline correctly? Should I focus on one thing or do 8 things at the same time and be on all the social channels and ask some really difficult strategy questions? So that's where I kind of dip my toe back into the water and just trying to be helpful from that standpoint. But yes, in a lot of cases, the content marketing model is very similar to the content entrepreneurial model, except for content marketing, you're ultimately trying to sell a product and service. And from a content entrepreneurial standpoint, you're trying to be an independent business and support your family and live your dream and do all the things you want to do. But you still have to build that audience and monetize that audience.
And what do you find? I mean, I'm, grossly reducing it to a simplistic model, but a lot of the time when people hit challenges and they don't understand necessarily the next step, it becomes either skill or will. Like, do you find one's a bigger challenge than the other? Is it mindset or is it process that you come up against?
What I seem to find more than anything else is talking to the content creator and say, what do you want to do? Like, what is your big, hairy, audacious goal? Like, what are you trying to get to? That's why when I go and I'll do a presentation on sort of the building of Content Marketing Institute, I said, when we started the business in 2007, I didn't really know ultimately what I wanted this thing to be. It took me about 6 months to say, I would write it in the future like it already happened. I sold this business for $15 million by 2015. I wrote that in January of 2008. And I said, a lot of thinking went into that. I knew I wanted to have $15 million as an exit because after taxes, that would be $10 million US dollars and the whole thing and what I would need to get there and how to position the business. And content creators that I talk to, they don't know. They don't have that. They're like, oh, I'm just trying to build something. And they don't. But if you're a business, you have to have some big goal. Like if you look at when Schultz created Starbucks, he had a big, hairy, audacious mission statement and said, we're going to do this. And of course it changed over time, but he wrote that down and he reviewed it on a regular basis and shared it with his employees. Well, content creators need to do the same thing. It's going to evolve. It's always going to change. It might change on a daily basis, but you have to start with something. You have to write that down. You have to review it ongoing because that's how it comes to reality. That's how you grow this thing and make this thing. And I was meeting too many content creators that weren't doing that. They were just focused on, oh, okay, well, I don't know exactly what my subscribers should be and how many followers and those types of things. Okay, well, let's figure this out. This is what I'm trying to do. Just like when Michael Jordan started off every year with the Chicago Bulls, he was like, I want to win a championship. Okay, great. What's my first step today to make sure that happens in 6 months? And that's what I keep talking to content entrepreneurs about. And just think strategically, what do you need to do? And then most likely what comes of that is a lot of no's. Well, if I'm going to do that, if I want an exit in 3 years, or I want to create this thing into a 100-employee business, here's the things I should be doing, and here's the things I should not be doing. And that's probably the biggest outcome from doing some kind of a written statement, because you're like, I can't do that anymore. And I have to stop doing that so I can say a big fat yes to these 3 things that are going to help me reach my goal.
What surprises you the most when you have these conversations? Like, what's cropped up that you maybe not foreseen?
I did a little workshop with a bunch of entrepreneurs. And the first thing I asked as part of that process was, okay, how many of you have some kind of an exit plan? And of the 50 people, like 5 people raised their hands. So I'm already like, oh, that's horrible. I said, well, how many of you 5 have written it down somewhere? None. None. Mm-hmm. These are just basic business 101 questions. Like, what do you want? What do you envision for your company? So the biggest thing that surprised me, Lee, is a radio silence on that question. And it's just such a simple question. And that's probably because, when I got started in marketing, it was actually in publishing. Mm-hmm. And we would start every year with, okay, what do we envision for next year? Okay, we envision this kind of growth. Well, okay, half my growth is going to come from organic and half my growth will come from acquisition of some kind. And we were small, and I still believe that, by the way. I still think content creators don't look at acquisition enough, but we can talk about that later. So if you're listening to this, it's like, okay, well, what do we need? What do we think success looks like for the next year, for the next 3 years, for the next month? I want those numbers down there, and I want you to get up in the morning and I want you to review that. And before you go to sleep at night, I want you to look at that too. So you're thinking about it and it's working into your brain overnight. And you're going to get up and you're going to have all kinds of ideas on how that's going to change your business and what you're doing. So that's probably the biggest surprise, is just, how do I say this? Too much focus on content creation. Not enough focus on just basic, where are we taking the business and where is the growth coming from? Because when you, like we talked about acquisition, I probably had, I don't know, dozens, over 20 calls with content creators who were like, well, I really think to get to this certain area, we need to have this kind of an audience. And then I can start offering these kinds of products, sponsorship products, or whatever the direct revenue products are. Nobody ever thinks about acquiring another content product from somebody else, which, by the way, every content creator who has created something, it's for sale. Everyone. I haven't met one that wouldn't consider selling at some price. It's always for sale. So when you think about, this is a couple of years ago, HubSpot, they wanted to get in, they wanted to buy an entrepreneurial newsletter. Wait, how hard is it today to have an entrepreneurial email newsletter that has over 1 million subscribers? How long would it take HubSpot to do that? 3 years? 5 years? Maybe never? Or, wow, the hustle's right there. And HubSpot could buy that for about 6% of their annual sales and marketing budget. Wow. And they did that. They did that because they've got people that are thinking about business strategy on their marketing team. Well, okay, you're a content creator. You need to be doing the same thing.
There's almost an irony there, because as a content producer, there is a very real conversation around, regardless of platform, what's the point of the content? Like, what do we want to achieve with this content? So that people aren't zooming out and actually using that for the business is, there's definitely an irony there.
And we almost always think more, right? We almost invariably, as a content creator, we think more is better. But from what I've looked at, case studies, whatever, sometimes less, actually most of the time, less is more. I mean, look at the most famous content creator on the planet. It's been talked about forever, Mr. Beast. Mm-hmm. Mr. Beast pretty much only focused on one channel for 7 years before doing anything else, just YouTube. Everything I could figure out about YouTube took him 3 years just to figure out what topic to create content about. So I said, I'm not going to worry about any of these other channels, where if you have a content creator starting today, they almost invariably think, oh, okay, well, I need to be on YouTube. I probably need to do TikTok. Joe keeps telling me I need an opt-in channel, data channel that I can own or actually have control over. So maybe email newsletter there too. And then podcasts. I mean, everybody's going on a podcast today. So I need to, no. All that's no. It's simple. Less is more. Focus is better. What you can be the best at always wins out over doing all the little things.
And that is a really, really good point, because it's very tempting because of certainly with a lot of the tools that are out now, the threshold is perceived to be lower to be able to at least contribute on different channels, not necessarily compete, but certainly contribute. How has that changed that dropping of the threshold of, because it used to be, in a lot of ways, a lot of the content that's produced now, it was much more difficult to produce. Certainly a blog hasn't probably changed in the difficulty in terms of the physical delivering a blog. Everything else seems to be a lot easier. How much of an influence do you think that is on the quality of the content that comes out?
Well, you're right. I think it's easier to create average content. It's easier to create mediocre content. I mean, especially if we want to talk about AI stuff. You want to talk about AI, let's talk about average information because it's everywhere. I mean, now that with Tilt Publishing, we're sort of in the book space. There's 1,000 books a week that's created by ChatGPT and whatever. There's more than ever before. So here, it's a real quandary, right? We're a content creator. We're trying to build a business. It's easier for us to create content, easier than ever before. It's also easier than ever before for anyone else to create content. And what we're seeing with business, like we see all these case studies and these people that are, getting 1 million followers on TikTok or some other channel. But from what I'm seeing firsthand, it is harder to build a content creation business now than it was when I started in 2007. And I know that's saying a lot, but there's just so much competition. There's so much. So, that's why we talk about the content tilt. What's your content tilt? What is your area of differentiation that you can break through all the clutter? Very, very difficult, very challenging, takes a long time. Really have to understand the needs and wants of your audience to build that relationship ongoing, because you know what? Anybody can do it. So what's that thing? What's that point of view that you're going to have that's different than anyone else? So, I mean, I guess we agree on the fact that, oh yeah, absolutely easier than ever before. How about to be a content entrepreneur? I think it's getting more difficult to do that, because in 2007, if I wanted to be listed in Google on a search term, 6 to 9 months of hard work, I could get there. I could get to the top 10. Almost anyone in marketing that I really wanted. Today, first of all, do I even want to do that today?
Yeah.
What, is search engine optimization a thing? Where are people searching? Are they using ChatGPT? Are they using Google? Google's using its AI algorithm to give you an answer now. So it just seems like there's more barriers, and if I'm on YouTube or TikTok and I'm building an audience, what does that mean? If I create a piece of content and I have 10,000 followers on TikTok, are they going to see it? Maybe not. Maybe no one sees it, because TikTok's algorithm's going to. So I have all these barriers in the way. So it is much more difficult to do this than it was, I think, a few years ago.
I mean, the pandemic there was obviously an explosion of content, right? As more and more people were at home during lockdowns, producing a lot of content. We've obviously, Geniuslink, we're massive in the Amazon space and supporting affiliates, right? And we've seen lots of our creators who had done nothing previously. Pandemic hit, and then it exploded. Do you think there's a long tail to that, or do you think it'll dip, or do you think it'll continue rising?
So I don't want to be so negative on it. That's harder than ever. There's always another content niche that's available. That's why I love B2B publishing and growing up there, because it's like, oh, if you have a group of buyers with unmet informational needs, that's an opportunity for a content business, right? Mm-hmm. Or content marketing, whichever the case is. So from that standpoint, and all the changes that we have in technology and what's going on in all these areas, every day there's a new one. Like if an industry, if you're in the logistics industry, supply chain, wow, there's so many unmet informational needs that maybe if you're a large media company, you're going to ignore because you don't see an opportunity there. But if you're one person, you can say, I can attack that issue. I know that audience needs to know this information, and we can go at it.
And do you think it is still the boring, like the quote unquote boring businesses? Like, you mentioned logistics, but I know I mentioned the cardboard industry to someone the other day, and that's ridiculously large amounts of money. And Do you think it's those boring businesses that are still untapped?
If I had no expertise in anything, and I'm a content creator, and I want to do this, I want to create content in some area, I wouldn't go after the consumer side. It's just inherently more crowded, and it's inherently more obvious. But you said cardboard? That's something a lot of people wouldn't think about. It's also something a lot of people wouldn't be able to get the experience to do. Well, how many content creators are going to be in that space versus a consumer space? Very, very few. So you're just like, go where they ain't, right? Go into that B2B so you can create a real specialty. The other thing is what's amazing is just from a business model standpoint as a content entrepreneur, there's a lot of money in these B2B spaces because you don't need as much of an audience. And they're also willing to purchase that media brand that you're building much easier. Any company in the B2B space is inherently thinking about traditional marketing because that's what most of the people that are executives in that company grew up with, and they understand it. But if you start talking about them doing things like doing a TikTok video or a YouTube show or a regular e-newsletter consistent over 6, 9 months, 12 months, that's not interesting to them. That's interesting to us. That's interesting to the creator. So I think the opportunities are so much bigger on the business to business side.
Who's out there at the moment that you see that is really living your philosophy?
Oh, the biggest one is probably, I see all the time, is Jay Klaus, who started a long time ago doing it specifically for other creators. Mm-hmm. He's done really well. Another one is Dan Runcie, who runs Trapital. And Dan focused specifically on the business of hip hop, not music, the business behind it. So targets a very specific group. So started with an email newsletter, built that up over time. Basically, that's all, was just focusing on the Trapital newsletter, and then created a conference. I think he just had another conference. So he's building this little media conglomerate just off of the business of hip hop. I love that because it's a focus on one channel. It doesn't have to be email. It could be it could be YouTube. It could be podcasts. It could be a series of research papers. It could be documentaries. It could be anything, right? You focus on doing one thing really well. And then once you build that minimum viable audience, then you expand your products into other areas that you can monetize. In this case, had sponsorship for the newsletter, and then went on and started an event that's sponsored, and you get registrations. So figure that out for your thing, for your niche, and now you've got something.
In that figuring out stage, right? Like, is there a natural rhythm to, in terms of pace or amount of time that you've seen creators go through or businesses go through to understand where the light bulb, right? That light bulb moment where they realize actually that is what they need to be doing, or is it different for everyone?
I haven't seen very many people just get it right away. I remember when John Lee Dumas came out and started Entrepreneurs on Fire podcast, which is a really popular podcast, and he's done very well, lives in Puerto Rico now, multimillionaire, done all the things. He got it right away. He seemed to figure out, he's like, nobody's doing a daily podcast for entrepreneurs. Nobody was doing that.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that. He did that. 9 months. He's profitable. Very short period of time. Done. Most content creators, they'll go 3 to 6 months and then they pivot. They pivot in some way and then they find it. I didn't have it right away in 2007. I mean, I didn't know that ultimately what was going to drive the business was an in-person event, because there were go where they're not. There was no in-person event organized for content marketers. And the only reason I know that, knew to do that, Lee, is because I kept getting requests. Yeah. I was trying to sell a matching service for content marketers. I was trying to match up content creators with brands who needed content.
Right.
And I was going to be the eHarmony for content marketing. I thought it was the most brilliant idea in the world. Terrible business model. Didn't work really well. The whole time I'm getting emails and calls from people that are saying, Joe, my team needs training in content marketing. Is there an event that I can send them to? And I'm like, well, no, there's this one little one over here. And then I'm like, oh my God, they're telling me exactly what to create. That took 2 years until I saw that opportunity, until I renamed everything Content Marketing Institute. I can't believe it took that long, but it did. So with a lot of us, you fall so much in love with the product and the business you're trying to create. You're not open to the possibilities. Now I'll never make that mistake again. I throw something out there, whatever it is, and then I really want to listen. I really want to be fact checked on this thing. Okay, what am I doing wrong? What am I missing? Figure out who your fans are that you really trust, that are going to give you honest feedback and not just love you for everything you do. Like what's wrong? What's not right? And be open to that. It takes months and sometimes years to get there. That's why when we talk about the Content Inc. model, I always say, 12 to 18 months till you probably get to a point where you're at least on paper making some money.
Because you talked about getting feedback and hearing and listening and now actively going out, but obviously the audience gets bigger and bigger. There's more and more voices. How do you filter out what you should be listening to and what you maybe think you shouldn't be listening to?
In my experience, and I would say probably today, the best thing that I did as a creator was get face-to-face with my audience at events. So strategically, starting when I launched the business in 2007, even before that, every month I was at a business where marketers were at. Marketers are my audience. I'm there. I'm going to sessions and I'm introducing myself on either side, and I'm talking to them and I'm saying, what do you challenge with these? What's going on? Why are you here? What are you trying to learn? And I'm there face to face. So a lot of it is still gut. Oh boy, that really resonates. I've heard that more times than not. That was also back in the day when I was doing a blog and it had comments. I would see the comments. So, oh, okay, there it is. Whatever. People are sending me emails. When I first started this is in 2000, I first started in business to business publishing. My mentor, Jim McDermott, who's no longer alive, he said the most important thing you can do as a creator of a media brand is to set up listening posts. And I said, listening posts? What's listening posts? He said, if you're an editor, if you're a journalist, he said, you need to know what truth is, like what's going on out there. So however you need to do it, you should do regular surveys. You should be calling your readers. We used to do reader calls, which is so funny. From 2000 to 2005, I would call up readers on a weekly basis and figure out what was going on with their lives, with their jobs. What do they love? What do they not love? Whatever. Not trying to sell them anything. Just talk to them. We don't do that a lot today because a lot of people, and by the way, I love surveys, Lee. Like I'm a big fan of research and surveys. I do them all the time, but a lot of times you don't get the feedback you want to. You don't get completely honest until you have a conversation with somebody. So today more than ever before, if we can get outside of our screen and go and talk to somebody face to face. So when I wrote The Will to Die, which was my novel in 2019, 2020, I had one persona, my wife. My wife loves thrillers. She likes them a very particular way. So every time I wrote everything down, I'm like, this is how she would like it. This is how, because she was the reader that I was targeting. So go out and find who your persona is in the person. You meet Sally, you meet Jim, whoever you meet, that is the person that you're going to write for. Ann Hanley, I don't know if you know Ann, prolific writer. She wrote a book called Everybody Writes. She's CEO of Marketing Profs. She says that every newsletter that she writes, she has one person in mind for that newsletter, a specific real person. And the only reason that she can do that is because she's at so many events and she talks to her audience live and in person. So that would be my recommendation for anybody listening to this is 2025 in-person events. Figure out a way to make it affordable to get to those events, and they'll pay off for you.
But what's the like, that's a great piece of advice, right? Like that's really, really solid. And it's a great reminder, even for people who are on the content journey, who are content entrepreneurs. But what's that bad advice that's out there that just won't go away?
I gotta be on every channel. it drives me crazy.
Mm.
And when I talk about it in presentations, I talk about how every individual has a certain amount of content energy. So if you picture your content energy as like a Hershey bar or a chocolate bar, and you take that and you put it into bits. And so you've got 20 every week, you've got 20 pieces of content energy. And what most content creators do is they're like, okay, I'm going to throw this amount to Twitter X. I'm going to throw this amount to LinkedIn, this amount to Insta, this amount to TikTok, this amount to my book, this amount to my newsletter, this amount to my podcast. And I didn't even get started yet, right, Lee?
Yeah.
I got another 10 or 20 that I can go through.
Yeah.
The average content creator is on 13 to 15 to 17 different platforms doing different things. And I don't know where they got this advice from. And if I said this back in the day in one of my books, I feel horrible about it. But you do not have to be everywhere your customers are at.
Yeah.
You should be at the place that you've given your full energy to. And you are positioning yourself as the leading informational expert in that area. Why can Mr. Beast move from YouTube now to all these other channels? Because he is investing in a huge team to help him to do that. But back in the day, it was one thing. When Red Bull Media House is one of the largest media companies in the world. Everybody knows Red Bull for its energy drinks. Red Bull has an amazing media company behind it called Red Bull Media House. How did Red Bull Media House start? It started with a print publication that actually started at the racetrack. They figured out the process, and it's called the Red Bulletin. And that's what they focused on for the first 3 years, was just that magazine, until they got it right and they figured out who their audience was. And now they're doing all the things because they can, because they're driving so much revenue. You cannot be amazing on TikTok and do the most incredible podcast in your industry right now. That's why we talk about, you really want to focus on, building the base. We call it building the base. It's the third step. Building the base. What is the base going to be? Is the base going to be an e-newsletter? I'm not saying you shouldn't be on X or you shouldn't be on Instagram, but you're not going to spend a lot of time there until you get this one thing right. I want you to have the best e-newsletter or the most amazing podcast or the most incredible YouTube show. That's how it always starts. And then you can do all the things. So to answer your question, it's that. And it's very hard to persuade any kind of content creator that they don't have to be everywhere. And I'm like, you don't.
Absolutely rock solid. But equally, I could definitely attest to the conversations I've had. Definitely advice that probably won't be followed in 100 different
That's
scenarios.
right. They don't want to do it. And by the way, they don't believe it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I mean, when Content Marketing Institute is, it was different back in 2009, 2010, 2011, but we just said, okay, how do we create the most amazing blog for content marketing? Like, I want this to be the place where marketers get information. So we just focused 90% of our resources on having them have an amazing article every day. That in itself is, I can't imagine if we were doing a YouTube show and a podcast and all the podcast wasn't launched till 2013. That's 4 years after we did the blog. So I'm like, but you're right. They're like, oh, no. Look at TikTok. We got to be there. Look at Insta. Oh, no, I can do Insta and then I can repurpose it on TikTok. All right, do whatever you want. Don't even listen to me. That's fine. The best thing that you can do for your business is say no to things. That's the best thing. That's the best piece of advice I could give to anyone doing anything. Start saying no to as many things as you can so you can say that one big emphatic yes and be great at one thing. So.
No, it's definitely the if it's not hell yeah, right? Like that's the
if it's not hell yeah. But yeah, you're right. They're gonna be no, not doing it, Joe. Not. I'm gonna do all the things. Good luck with that.
I mean, you mentioned AI, right? Like earlier, and that's the temptation, isn't it? To I'll just use AI. I'll just use an AI tool, and then it'll be fine, and it'll do it for me, and it'll repurpose it, and I can do this. But how do we guard against that temptation?
The only thing that I can do for the people that I took to on a regular basis is show up examples like Dan Runcie, like Jay Klaus, like Amy Porterfield, like Michael Stelzner, like what I've done at Content Marketing Institute or the Tilt, and just say, look, I'm sure there's examples out there where you get the one-hit wonders. There's always a one-hit. I mean, I still love Never Gonna Break My Stride by Matthew Wilder from 1983. But Matthew Wilder didn't do anything else, right? I love that. That's great. Maybe there's that example that you're going to bring up about somebody hit 10 million followers on TikTok and they were doing all this other. I just don't see it. It takes time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. If you think this is a short-term thing, I'm not the guy that's going to help you. I'm not the guy that you can figure out how to game the system, use AI and use all the tools, and you can build it. All I see are entrepreneurs out there that are busting their butts. They're focused on doing a couple things really well. They've identified a niche in their industry that is underserved. I can't say that enough. And they've done the math and realized that there's actually money there to be made. I just want people to look around. I'll tell you this story because this is how I feel when I work with content entrepreneurs. We were just in Iceland. We had a great time. We had a group of us, and we were at the Laundranger on the peninsula. It doesn't matter. We stopped our van in the parking lot, and there's buses everywhere, and there are hundreds of people getting off these buses, and they're going to one direction. They're going down this path to see the view of Laundranger. It's going to be amazing. One of the best sights ever. Well, the six of us are dejected because we got there in our little van, and it's like, I don't even know how we can get out there and break through all the people. There's too many people. My wife, God bless her, she looks over to the right. She says, look, there's a little sign over there that says Laundranger this way, the way around. And there's nobody going that direction. So let's go that direction. So we went around that way. It was a little rockier. It was a little bit more downhill and then uphill. It was a little bit soggier. It just rained. So not the easier path, but nobody was on that path. And we went down all the way to the bottom after about a 3/4 mile hike, and we were the only ones there. And it was the most beautiful thing ever. So to get back to my point about content creators, they get off the bus and they're looking for, oh, yeah, it's everybody else going that way. I want to do that too. Instead of just stopping for a second and looking around and saying, is there a different way? Can I be talking about this thing in a different way? Should I be creating content over here in a different way, doing things a little bit differently? My point of view is just a little bit different instead of just doing it like, oh, this is what I think. This is what I follow this person that's doing it this way, whatever. It's fine. But just stand back for 1 second and just ask yourself the question. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah. Less of the same, more of the necessary.
When I used to do hardcore content audits and I used to go in, these are $1 billion companies, and we're doing like a basic content audit over an area. They would say, oh, Joe Pulizzi's coming in. He's a content guy. He's going to give us some great content ideas. And I never would, because I'd always go in and say, okay, here's the 3 things that you should stop doing right now. They're like, what? It's like, yeah, you're doing all these things. It's like, let's do these things really well. Like, what if you took the resources from these 3 over here that you're doing and put those into these 2 things over here? You have the most amazing newsletter in your industry to this audience, and you have the most incredible podcast, the number 1 pod. What if you took all these other things that you're doing, fooling around over here, and put them over there? Oh man, yeah, I don't know. It would be a lot better. It's very hard for them to cut and say, oh no, yeah, we shouldn't do that. But that's the right decision.
And it's the sunk cost fallacy, isn't it? It's like, wow, we've invested all this. We need to continue on the journey. We need to keep going. So, but like, do you find it's businesses or creators, like individual entrepreneurs, who are harder to convince of the benefits of slimming down their content and being more streamlined?
Oh, it's much harder for organizations because you have multiple people. You have multiple people that are making decisions that are responsible for it. And nobody wants to be wrong. Like, you'd rather do nothing than be wrong. and to make a courageous decision. I can convince a content creator to make a change if they're desperate. And that's sometimes honestly what it takes, because let's say, and this happens all the time. It's not, I'm not going to put somebody's name out there, but they've been at it for 12 to 18 months. They haven't seen the kind of growth in their newsletter they wanted to. They failed in many social media. They're just not feeling good about it. But they've come to the point now, if they can't figure this thing out, they're going to go have to get a job, a job, working for somebody else. And they don't want to do that. They feel horrible. So yeah, much, much harder for organization, because they're fine with the status quo for the most part. They don't really, really want to make change. But an individual, this is their livelihood. They have kids. They have a mortgage. They have a loved one they're trying to support. And if you talk to them and say, look, this is serious stuff. Like, okay, then you can convince them. Then they'll say, okay, we're going to do things differently.
So what are you most optimistic about then, looking forward, right? Like, we've talked about a lot of challenges, but like, when you look forward, what are you most optimistic about when it comes to content and your philosophy, but also how it's out there in the world?
Well, outside of all the negativity that I'm throwing out at you, I still think being a content entrepreneur is the best job, career you could choose. I can work anytime I want. I can spend time. I mean, when I left my 9-to-5 job in 2007, my kids were 6 and 4 at the time. I went from not seeing them at all. I was on the road half the time. I went from not seeing them at all to seeing them all the time. It was the greatest gift for myself and hopefully for them ever. And that's still to some of the stuff we talked about, picking that niche and picking a base and focusing on being great at one thing and listening posts and all that stuff. That's still available. So big opportunity today. So let's just talk about AI. Let's pretend that AI is not going to take over the world. We're going to have robots and World War III and all these horrible things. Let's just say that it can help us do all those mundane tasks so that we can spend more time on the content itself. So I'm now, like, just for me, I'm not a full-time content creator anymore, but now I can do my Content Inc. podcasts in video fairly easily now, because a lot of this automation helps me do that. And This Old Marketing is now on video and audio, and it takes me half the amount of time to produce as it used to. And I don't have to go into the raw files anymore and fiddle with all the audio. And I hated doing that. I'm not a technical person. I don't have to spend 30 minutes looking for the most appropriate image for my podcast, because I can get it done in 5 seconds, because it's not that important. I don't have to hire a graphic designer to do those types of things. So there's a lot of things with, I'm able to hopefully be better with the content itself, because these day-to-day mundane tasks that I was doing and spending time on, I don't have to do that anymore. That should hopefully get a lot better. So if I would like to compel, and if I'm talking directly to a content creator right now, I would say, don't use AI tools to help with your content. Have it help with your process. That is the huge benefit. Have it help with your ideation. Have it help with your brainstorming. Set up a thread specifically for your persona so you can talk to that persona all the time. Not to help you write the content, not to help you produce create the actual podcast itself. Have it so it can do all those other things so that you can create the most amazing piece of content that's answering that audience's need or question or whatever. So that's where I think the opportunity is at. And I think that's where we're getting it wrong as creators. We're thinking about AI helping with the content. No, that's not what it's for. It's for all the other garbage stuff that we don't want to do, so that we can, wow, look at that. I did that in half the amount of time. What kind of a savings is that? I can now spend more time with my kids.
Yeah.
I can now spend more time figuring out where the money that's coming in through my business, where it should go, so I can get the most out of that and answer those strategic questions instead.
But you know what? That is absolutely incredible advice to end on. You have been a really wonderful guest. Really appreciated your time today. Where's the best place to, or for our audience to connect with you after this?
Yeah, so joepulizzi.com, Pulizzi.com. I've got a newsletter called Orange Letter. I do every other week. I've been doing it for a long time. And then, my project right now is Tilt Publishing. And so if anyone out there is interested in getting their nonfiction book out and sell directly to an audience, you can find us at thetilt.com. And hopefully, I still believe, we didn't really talk about it, but as a differentiation, as the best business card on the planet, like to be the center point for your content creation strategy, I still believe in the power of a book, and have for a long time. And I think that's a huge opportunity. So that's why we're putting some energy behind that as well.
Oh no, absolutely, and that is really good advice. And actually, just to touch on that before we sign off, how soon should someone consider a book in their content journey?
I have to tell you the story on that. We didn't start Content Marketing Institute officially till 2010. I had a book out before then. A book paves the way for a lot of opportunities, specifically for speaking, for getting people on your show, if you have a podcast, for interviews, for your e-newsletter. It makes everything a little bit easier. It's kind of like butter. Butter makes everything a little bit better. A book makes everything easier from a content creation standpoint. If you can do a blog to book strategy, a podcast to book strategy, a Instagram to books, whatever, you can think about that strategically and you can do the work. Like Epic Content Marketing, I plan that as I have to write this blog anyways. So I'm going to write this out and I'm going to the chapters and I'm going to write them, blog posts, and then I'm going to, in 6 months, hopefully I'll have 75% of a book. And that's exactly what we did, but you have to do it strategically. So I would say, as you're doing the other content already that you have to do, that's in your content plan, think about what this would look like as a book. And you can do both of those things without losing the focus that we talked about. That's so important.
Again, Joe, really appreciate your time. Lots of nuggets. You've been an amazing guest. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Lee. Anytime. I really appreciate it. Great questions. Love the questions.